"Run!" was the last thing I heard from the old hunter. A moment later, his body disappeared into the pitch blackness. Wolves don't hunt in winter in these parts, but what I saw next made me question whether they were wolves at all. For 20 years, I have been teaching people to survive in the harshest conditions, training special forces. My name is Alexander Nevitt, and 7 years ago, I left the service and became a gamekeeper here in the mountains of the Stanovi Range. I thought I'd seen enough and nothing would surprise me. How wrong I was. That year, winter came early. Frosts here were about minus 40 degrees already in early December. The locals were worried. Such an early cold snap had not happened for more than 30 years. Evenki old men were especially worried. They said that when such frosts come, something ancient in the taiga awakens. There was genuine fear in their words. They stopped going into the forest, forbade their children to go near the old hunting trails. Even experienced hunters who usually laughed at grandfather's tales now tried not to go deeper into the thicket. And I did not believe in omens or legends. I believed only in what I saw with my own eyes, until the day came that changed everything. December 7th of the 97th year. I remembered that day forever. It was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, but the sun had almost set. It gets dark early in our lands in winter. There was an unusual silence in the taiga. In such frosts, about minus 43 degrees, even breathing freezes in the air. Usually at this time you can hear at least the cawing of crows or the knocking of woodpeckers, but not that day. I was returning from a round of my plot when I noticed the first strange tracks. Wolf tracks, but not the right kind. Too deep, as if the animals had gotten twice as heavy, and they didn't walk straight, as wolves usually did, but in strange zigzags, as if they were looking for something. Sometimes the tracks broke off, then started again. That's not how wolves hunt. The tracks led to an abandoned hunting lodge, the same one that the locals preferred to keep silent about. An old Evenk man once mentioned that some rituals were held there, but he quickly hushed up the conversation. The hut was about 300 meters away when I heard the first howl. It was different. Over the years of working in the taiga, I had learned to distinguish the voices of wolves. There are hunting howls, there are calling howls, there are warning howls. But this one was very special. Something ancient, almost human, could be heard in it. Suddenly my gaze was caught by strange markings in the trees. At first I took them for ordinary shading, the marks that hunters use to mark their trails. But when I looked closer, I realized they were old. Very old. Some of them were over 100 years old, and they were arranged strangely, as if they were arranged in some pattern. I didn't see the hut right away. It blended almost completely into the forest in the thickening dusk. The door was ajar, though I remembered that I had locked it last time. On the old table was a shabby diary. I hadn't seen one of those in a long time. Leather-bound, pages yellowed by time. I opened it. The entries were in Evenki, but there was something between the pages. An old photograph. It shows a group of hunters, obviously taken here, near this hut. The date on the back is 1967, and behind the people, in the shadows of the trees, what are those dark silhouettes? The howling's coming again, closer, much closer. I looked out the window and froze. On the edge of the forest, about 50 meters from the hut, stood a man. Tall, gray-haired, in an old hunting jacket. He slowly raised his hand and beckoned me to him. "Thought you wouldn't come," he said in clear Russian as I approached. "I've been waiting for you for 3 days. They'll be back soon. We have to hurry." "Who's coming back?" I asked, but at that moment, behind his back, wolves began to emerge from the thicket. 1, 2, 3. I counted 8 pairs of burning eyes. "Run!" shouted the old man, pushing me to the side. A moment later, his silhouette vanished into the thickening darkness, and the howl grew louder and louder. and now I could definitely hear words in it. Ancient words in a language that no one alive today knew. I ran all the way to the gatehouse without looking back. Only there, when I locked the door and melted the stove, I began to realize what had happened. I still had the diary in my pocket, which I had grabbed from the house. My hands trembled as I opened the yellowed pages. Most of the entries were in Evenki, but some pages contained notes in Russian. One entry in particular caught my attention. It was dated December 1967. For the third day, we have been observing strange behavior of wolves. They gather in packs of 8. The old men say it's a sign. Huglanak is coming. We must get away from here. The text stopped. I took out the photograph I'd found between the pages. Now, in the light of the kerosene lamp, the dark silhouettes behind the hunters' backs were clearer. They were wolves. They stood there, in the shadows of the trees, looking straight into the lens. In the morning, I went to the village. The snowdrifts had drifted overnight, and the frost had only intensified. Stove fumes rose in columns into the sky, a sure sign that the cold would continue. It was necessary to talk to the old Evenki men, but their houses were empty. All 5 families seemed to have vanished. Their houses looked as if abandoned. Cold stoves, untouched snow on the porches, closed shutters. In such a frost, they had to be heated constantly, so they must have left at least 24 hours ago. Only Madame Maria, the oldest resident of the village, was still there. I recognized her hut by the blue smoke from the chimney. She always heated it with special herbs she collected in the summer. Inside it smelled of something woody and bitter. The old woman was sitting by the stove, going through some birch bark wrappings. Around her neck hung a time-darkened medallion, the exact pattern I had seen on the shadows in the forest. "They've gone," she said, not even surprised at my arrival. "Gone to the mountains. They know it's time." "What time?" "Huglanak is coming up. A great feast." Ancient She was silent for a moment, scrutinizing me. Her eyes, faded with age, were suddenly sharp and attentive. "You should leave too. Before they pick you next. Who are they?" Instead of answering, she held out an old birch bark box to me. It smelled of smoke and something else, some unfamiliar herbal odor. Inside was a medallion, blackened by time and engraved with a pattern just like the shadows on the trees. On the back were barely recognizable symbols. My grandfather wore it, the last shaman in our land. He was dragged into the woods by wolves that night, just like your acquaintance yesterday. I went cold. "How do you know about yesterday?" She grinned. "I know. And I know about the 8 wolves. And I know about what's in the diary, too. They always do that. First they show the diary, then." She didn't have time to finish. There was a knock at the door, so hard that the panes in the windows shook. On the threshold stood Greg, a young hunter, pale as death, with a frosted beard. "Alexander Nevitt, you are asked to come to the old cordon urgently. You won't believe what's happened there." The old cordon was 15 kilometers away from the village. It took Gregum and me an hour to get there by snowmobile. All the way he was silent. Only at the last kilometer he turned around and shouted through the roar of the engine, "There, Stefan! He found something in the woods." Stefan had been our forester for about 30 years. I'd never seen him as pale as he was at that moment. He was sitting on the porch of the cordon, clutching a thermos of tea in his hands, looking somewhere in the woods. "Let's go," he said in lieu of a greeting. "You'll have to see for yourself." We walked in the deep snow for about half an hour. The frost was getting worse. The thermometer on my watch read -45. Finally, Stefan stopped and silently pointed ahead. At first, I didn't understand what was wrong. And then I saw the trees. They were all covered with thorns, hundreds of thorns. They formed a huge circle over a kilometer in diameter. In some places, the bark had been stripped recently. The resin had not yet had time to freeze. But the worst was in the center of the circle. There were 8 wolfskins lying there, old, almost decayed. They were laid out in a special way, beams from the center, like spokes in a wheel. The snow around them was untouched, not a single trace of them, as if someone had laid them out in the air. In the dim winter light, I noticed that each pelt was a different color, from almost white to charcoal black. But the creepiest part was in the center of the circle. There, frozen into the ice, lay a medallion, exactly like the one Madame Maria had shown us. All 3 of us stared at it in silence, hesitant to come closer. The air here seemed thick, heavy, as if the atmosphere itself had thickened over the place. That's not all. Stefan pulled a shabby envelope from an inside pocket. His hands were visibly trembling. Remember that old man who was dragged off by the wolves yesterday? Here, I found it in his hut. The photo is dated 1937. I took the picture. It had yellowed with time, the edges were frayed, but the image was still clear. It showed the same clearing, the same circle of shadows, and the same 8 wolf skins, laid out in exactly the same way. Even the colors of the skins were the same, from white to black. And on the back is an inscription in faded ink, Huglanak. The circle will close in 60 years. Alexander, Stefana's voice trembled. Today is exactly 60 years since that picture was taken. Look at the date. I flipped the photo over. December 13th, 1937. Another glance at the clock. December 13th, 1997. It was at that moment that a gust of icy wind blew across the clearing, kicking up a stubby dusting of snow into the air. And somewhere in the distance, there was a wolf howl. But now I could hear the words of an ancient language, and I finally understood what they meant. We need to get out of here, now! Stefan tugged on my sleeve. But when we got back to the snowmobiles, the engines refused to start. Apparently, the extreme cold had thickened the fuel. We were left alone, 15 kilometers from the settlement, in the middle of this terrible circle. The temperature continued to drop. The sky was covered with heavy clouds. The storm was beginning. Greg was the first to notice their approach. Look. His voice trailed off into a whisper. Wolves were beginning to emerge from the forest, not the way predators usually do, sneaking, preparing to attack. Number. They came out calmly, confidently. 8 wolves of different colors, from light gray to almost black. Exactly like the skins, Stefan whispered. They surround us. The wolves stood in a circle. Their eyes reflected the dim light of the winter day, yellow lights in the thickening twilight. The leader, a large black wolf, stepped forward. Something about his demeanor was strange, not animal-like. It was as if he was sizing us up, picking us out. The wolves didn't attack. They just stood there, surrounding us in a tight ring. At that moment, I remembered the old man's words before he died. He was trying to tell me something about choice, about sacrifice. The medallion in my pocket felt heavy. We only have 1 gun, Stefan whispered, slowly raising his carbine. 5 rounds of ammo. Don't shoot, I put a hand on his shoulder. Look at them. They're not preparing to attack. And it was true. The wolves stood motionless. Only the leader was moving slowly in a circle, as if searching for something, or choosing his prey. The blizzard was intensifying, the snow clouding their eyes. The wind howled with strange notes, like an ancient song. I took a step forward. Something told me I needed to show the locket. Alexander, no! Stefan shouted. But I had already taken it out of my pocket. The ringleader stopped. The next instant, something dark rushed towards me. A blow, snow in my face, sharp pain. I heard Stefana's gunshot, Greg's scream. The wolf jumped back, leaving dark drops on the snow. A second shot echoed through the taiga. The pack retreated into the darkness but did not run away. We could see their eyes between the trees. They were just waiting. All night we sat around a hastily built fire, listening to their howls. At dawn, the hunters found us. They saw the smoke from the fire. The wounds weren't too serious, just a couple of deep scratches. But there were things I never told anyone. About the way the leader looked into my eyes before he attacked. There was something frighteningly meaningful in his gaze. And about the locket that disappeared that night. They say all the dogs in the village howled that night. And they found strange tracks in the snow around the old cordon. So deep, it was as if the wolves had gotten twice as heavy as usual. Stefan says he doesn't remember anything, although I think he's afraid to talk about what happened. Greg couldn't take it anymore, quit his job and left the village, and I stayed. Somebody has to keep this taiga safe, and when I hear a wolf howl, I can't help but count the voices. It's always 8. And every year at the beginning of December, I check the old shades on the trees to see if there are new signs. A lot has changed since that night. Madame Maria disappeared from the village. They say she went to her relatives in another neighborhood. Greg couldn't stand it any longer and moved somewhere to the south. And Stefan. He still works in the forestry department, but he doesn't go to that square of woods anymore. I often wonder what really happened. Maybe it's just a coincidence, and wolf skins and old photos and strange animal behavior. But why 8 wolves? Why were they behaving so unnaturally? And what happened to the old man they dragged into the woods? The locket was never found. The gaps in the trees are slowly becoming overgrown with bark, but sometimes I think new ones are appearing. Or is it just a play of imagination? The local evinks return to the village only after a month. They answer all questions evasively, but I see them furtively baptizing when they pass by that clearing. But the evinks are not Christians. Maybe all these events are just strange animal behavior caused by some natural factors? Or the taiga really keeps ancient secrets in which it is better not to interfere? I'm still a gamekeeper here, and when I hear a wolf howl, I involuntarily listen. How many voices? And every time I hope to count any other number, just not 8. Friends, I will be glad to hear your opinion. What really happened in the taiga? Maybe some of you have encountered or heard something about such inexplicable phenomena. What could the shading on the trees mean? And why did wolves gather in groups of 8? Share your thoughts in the comments. And not to miss new stories, subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell. See you in the next episodes. Who knows what other secrets the boundless taiga keeps?